Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Shovel Knight. In the last part we got through our first major stage in the game, More Keep, and now it's time for our second stage out of the first starting two, the Lich Yard, layer of Specter Knight. This, out of the two levels you can start with, is easily the harder of the two, partially just due to a mechanic we'll see later on it, but we actually have our starting mechanic right off the bat. These, I'm not sure what they're supposed to be. My brain wants to translate them as like some sort of living moss or algae, but the little green pods on the ground. You can bounce off them with your little pogo jump as it is, but if you strike them, they'll fly about the height of your standard jump, and then you can jump off of them with a pogo from there to get a double jump, essentially. You can also hit them twice to make them go twice as high, though it's only needed to get 2 extras, I believe, or to shortcut past some level design, should the case be. Now, Specter Knight, according to his official bio, in life, he was a cruel and cunning warrior, and although his blood is now icy cold, he is no less formidable as a phantasm. The most begrudgingly loyal knight of the Order, Specter Knight follows the Enchantress only because she's capable of magically extending his undeath. Clutching a grim scythe in his shriveled claws, Specter Knight commands his weapon in it with uncommon cunning, and his next target is Shovel Knight. Pros, he's got a nice tattered crimson cloak, a supernatural scythe, and, you know, immortal. Cons, he's overly sentimental and tries a little too hard to act cool. Now, in that last screen there, you saw a little blue ghost-looking enemy. I think they're just called Invisishades. Everyone calls them ghosts. They are one of the other major mechanics of this stage, as sometimes they can spawn out of the gravestones that appear throughout the stage that you can use as either things to attack or pogo platforms, so to speak. However, they are immortal. If you attack them, they'll phase out for a while and stay still, and you can jump through them and all. But when they're in their standard state, they can't be outright killed. They can only be destroyed in one level later on, which is not here. More on that in however many parts. Best advice, just in the case there's perilous platforming with them around like this, attack them and phase them out, then keep an eye on where they phase back in and wait for them. And then attack them again and move through them so you can get a grasp of what the level design's looking like. And this is with a reason, by the way. I think this level is harder than King Knight's stage. Darkness platforming. It is super dark. Most other games that do that type of mechanic, either the period of time that you can see the stage in, or the way to see the design otherwise is a bit more stable, like a bird behind you, for instance, that has a flashlight. The lights will turn on when you jump, things of that nature. The only way you can see here is brief flashes of lightning that last less than a second. Thankfully, the level design stands out in such a way due to the color choices that you can get a good grasp on where it is, but it's still pretty perilous, especially because they like to hide bottomless pits in sections that you think you're safe. I never liked darkness gimmicks. That's arguably my least favorite platforming gimmick next to maybe wind platforming, should the case be, where it's really annoying. Like, look, you have no way of knowing where you are here aside from just waiting around. I don't like it, and it's also, in rooms like this, kind of prone to potentially giving some people with photosensitivity issues some problems. I know I'm only mentioning this 3.5 minutes in, but if you're photosensitive, be careful in this level. Because I can see that causing some problems. It hurts my eyes, even in the resolution I'm viewing this recording at. And now we have, I think this is the last major mechanic of the stage, these skeleton platforms. On their own, they're nothing of note. But when Shovel Knight and something of a substantial weight is otherwise on top of them, they start to sink. With that said, some of them already have a negative weight on them, so as long as you get rid of the weight that doesn't make them sink, they start rising. The big challenge here is to not dive into the water below, because that is instant death. It's nothing too hard, and they do usually just make a puzzle out of trying to get the enemies off of there, but you do need to be careful because sometimes just a standard enemy will set off the weight misbalance, and if you're not rushing in some regards, that can potentially cause some problems. Which is admittedly kind of counteractive to the way I would generally say to play this game. Shovel Knight, I think, is a game that's best played unless you're going for like the speedrunning achievement or doing speedruns in general, to take your time and observe your surroundings before you leap. Because the game likes to pull, not super trolly moves, but it definitely likes to trick you every now and then with the platforming where you want to do thing B instead of thing A, but it looks like you should do thing A because It's what the level design seems to imply. Now, we want to go to the left here, because to the right is proper progress, but I just destroyed those enemies. Thankfully, as you'll see here, this game has a bit of a Mega Man syndrome thing, in that if you scroll off screen and then head backwards, enemies will sometimes respawn. I say sometimes because it depends on whether or not there's a screen transition there. Some won't. It also depends on whether or not there's an enemy where the room will transition you onto. But for instance, you can take care of those enemies and then come back here to the left to get the chest relic for this stage. So as long as you're not too far away from a stage transition and you take care of an enemy in need, you're not out of luck. But here we get the phase locket, escape from all harm. For a short time at least. This is temporary invincibility, just flat out. It only lasts like 2 seconds if even. But you can spam it in sequence to stay invincible for a decent period of time. With that said, it's also, I think, the most costly relic in the game. I think costing maybe 10 weapon energy per use. So even in a game where you have a max of 100, you don't have too many uses of this. So make sure you're a bit careful with it. With that said, I do love that this is even here. Because some games don't like to give you the temporary invincibility item as a sub-weapon especially, just because there's a lot of potential for abuse, but I think they balance it pretty well in this game in that it doesn't last too long, it takes up a lot, they give you good warnings of how long it lasts, and the level design is fair to the point of you only really need it if you're having a lot of trouble with a section or so. I seldom go after that 80 gold I just got. The only reason I'm showing it off is because it took me years to even figure out that you could use that grave as a platform because my brain just refused to process it as such. Now, I'm gonna move on from this screen for a moment, but then immediately backtrack back for that fishing spot. This is partially due to paranoia that I forget about later on. To explain, most fishing spots in the game are either going to be the 350 gold fish I mentioned last part, or the truffle fish. I'd say only maybe 2 or 3 stages in the game, period, have a fishing spot that is also a music note page. I think it may only be 2 for that matter. The only reason I check so often early on is because I remembered there being some music note pages in some of them. Then promptly forgot because I was like, oh, well, I'm not getting the music notes. Maybe that's just not as common as I thought it was. Maybe I'm thinking of something in like the expansions. No, I'm thinking of this game. It's just only in like 2 or 3 stages. Make sure to check as many as you can. But again, as long as you're good on gold and you have all the upgrades you want, you don't need to, unless you're just going for all the music sheets because you like getting those numbers up. Also, this skeleton mini-boss is surprisingly annoying, partially because there's no safe way to jump on top of it, in my experience, in order to either skip the boss period or to just pogo jump off of it until it dies. Most of the other mini-bosses have a decent enough strategy for that, if it's possible at all. But that's the only one I feel like there's no safe way to do it. This is my nightmare section. This is where I died the most in my first playthrough because I hate darkness platforming, especially when used in tandem with platforms that move where there's nothing, or as we'll see later, even some of the skeleton platforms that sink when you're on top of it with one of the heavy skeletons. It's not too bad looking back. It is very much a thing of, on my first playthrough, I really just wasn't being patient. Because I'm thinking, in a way, it's because my Mega Man X and Zero style of playing sometimes infects my quote-unquote run-and-gun platformers, action platformers, wherein I tend to try and rush through the level design because it feels good, but there's just times you need to take it slow and relax so you don't end up causing a stupid death on your own part. With that said, we're about to reach Specter Knight himself. I almost went into a weakness, but there is no weakness, though. The Chaos Sphere can be a bit useful here in spades, as can the Fire Wand. This is no place for the living, mortal. You shall be summoned when it is your time. And everyone has a time, as we saw with your beloved Shield Knight. Lies! I won't believe such talk from phantoms. Your very existence is a vile deception. The Enchantress is just full of surprises. She granted me new life, so that I may take yours. Despite being one of the earliest bosses in the game, I honestly feel Specter Knight's one of the hardest to fight in Shovel Knight. His main technique is that he's going to be swinging his scythe from one corner to the opposite corner on the top or the bottom, in which case he'll swing it back to where he started. He can also do a little bit of a focus attack where he'll come right next to you and just slash you with his scythe, but towards the latter half of his health, he'll not only put darkness on the arena, he'll summon some skeletons on the 2 platforms and ground to try and act as obstacles, as well as swing his scythe in a swinging fashion, in which case he'll then just float across to grab it. This fight, I don't know why, I've always had trouble fighting him compared to other boss fights, and to an extent, I think it's just because of the darkness gimmick messing me up. Thankfully, if you position yourself just right, you can get right above him if he when he grabs his scythe on the bottom of the screen to get some pretty quick hits in. Additionally, I think he's one of the hardest just because the Chaos Sphere doesn't break him like it does other fights, as we'll see later on. As he's floating for most of the fight, therefore you just can't really hit him with it. But that's Specter Knight. The Lich Yard itself isn't too hard of a stage, though I think it is harder than Pridemore Keep, and thus should be taken on second. But Specter Knight himself, at least in my case, can be a bit of an ordeal to fight. Now, I didn't talk over the first one because it was essentially just a cutscene, but at the end of every section of the game where you complete all the knights you can fight for a bit, you get a minigame version of the Catcher segment where a bunch of the enemies from the stage you just went through attack you. And killing any of them gives us substantially more money than they did in the stage, so this is a good way to get some real extra gold. With that said, you only do this 3 times throughout the game, and I believe once Shield Knight herself appears on screen, you can not only damage enemies anymore, you also can't collect the money at all. So it's a bit annoying, but you can at least get some decent gold out of it all the same. Additionally, after taking out the campfire as usual, at the end of every section of nights, you also get a free meal ticket so you can raise your health by a total of 3 throughout the game, even without having to put any money into it. And with that, the next section of the map is unlocked. The next 2 sections of the game are both going to have 3 nights unlocked, rather than 2, though. With that, it's time for us to take care of our usual business here in town.
Wonderful. Let's see here. Oh, you found La Danse Macabre. Dead crowd tonight, says I. Lesson learned. Never crack jokes in a graveyard. Never, ever.
Okay, I have to wonder if the Bard's dialogue was written by Jake Kaufman or if he just had ideas for jokes they could use for the track names. Now, I forget how much money I spend here, but I would recommend using a little less here than you would prior to this, as once you beat the next stage, almost no matter what path you take, you're going to unlock another town to visit that's going to have a lot more items you can grab for even more expensive costs. With that said, since you have not only a gem section here, which as I mentioned last part, these are just revisits to level mechanics in different fashions in order just to get more money. There's seldom any enemies in these segments. It's just, hey, remember these mechanics? Do them again. This is also a point I could just recommend. If you have the excess money, grab some extra magic. I guess the best way to put it is it depends on your playstyle. If you're more conservative with your money and you want to spend it as much as you can so you can use less, spend more. If you don't like spending too much because you like to see the number grow and you only get upgrades when you feel it's completely necessary, spend less but play safer. I believe when these types of segments appear, if there's enemies, it's just because the enemies themselves were a mechanic in the previous stages. But they are definitely safer than the enemy rushes you can come through. With that, though, you may have noticed there was a red gem. There were 2 red gems on the map right then, actually. The one we just took care of, but one that is an outright panel you've been able to see since the start of the game. This is the Forest of Phasing. Yikes! Spikes! If only I could phase away to safety, I could cross and get so much treasure. The best way I can describe the gem panels you come across during the game is that they're testing grounds for 3 of the relics in the game. Usually the 3 that take a bit more mastering to get proper use out of. For instance, the Phase Locket here. We're going to have a lot of scenarios where you're over instant death spikes, but you can just spam the Phase Locket in order to get past them. These also give really good payouts, but they're usually either you get the treasure or you die sort of scenarios like that. So make sure to place yourself carefully and observe your surroundings again, especially in these. And make sure you're not spamming your relics too much, lest you get instances like that. And as you may have seen, my treasure bags weren't there that time when I came back there. That's because I died twice, and I lost out on some treasure permanently. I don't think I missed out on too much, maybe 500 total, 600. But still, that's annoying. They do generally give you ample weapon energy throughout these areas, but I'm not sure how much is required, period, in order to complete them. In the case that relic costs more. Though no relic does cost more than the phase locket. So if you're using somehow like 60 weapon energy between the major refills and the later two, I have questions. But that said, it's still relatively simple. The main levels are easily where the most interesting mechanics are. These little secondary areas are just for you to get a grasp on harder mechanics, or just to get used to what's going to come up on you in the future. With that, though, since I have some extra money, I'd say we can get a few more purchases done, and plus we have another music note.
Let's see here. Oh, you found the adventure awaits. You know, they've done studies. Reading maps is far easier with a musical mapping.
I wonder if that's true. I can believe it. There is some truth to the fact that studying with music that you would listen to normally apparently increases efficiency or something along those lines. Also, I'm very much at this point prioritizing magic because the sooner I can get that maxed out, the safer I'll be in the long run. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 4, we're once again heading after our next knight. I believe I'm going after Plague Knight. See you guys then.